So, I was going to make a short video today. I was going to make a short video because I had an idea to make, I guess, like a daily series of me just like picking a news story on Ground News, which is a news app that I use to look at news stories if I want to. I figured that's an easy way for me to make a little video, talk about stuff, say something that might be interesting to people, is, find just a story that is something I can talk about, not necessarily just explaining the story, because I don't find that interesting. There's plenty of people who do that on YouTube, but just kind of to take that story and just say whatever comes to mind for me from that. And I was going to do that today with this story, but unfortunately, I started doing a little bit more digging, and then I had a different idea, which would make a much longer video. Um, so, so this story comes up where it says, U.S. and U.K. spy chiefs, are in a joint conference praising Ukraine and calling for a Gaza ceasefire and whatever. And I guess the first thing that came to mind that I was thinking about and thought that was interesting about this story is that it feels to me like that doesn't normally happen, right? Like you don't you have State Department people, you have spokesmen, you have employees of the government, saying things about Ukraine and Gaza and stuff, but you don't have spy chief, the head of the CIA and the head of M16, MI6. It's MI6, right? I didn't do enough research, obviously. So, the first thing that this said to me was that these kind of people don't normally make these kind of public statements, which means that they are trying to signal specifically that the intelligence community of the United States and the UK is behind this, at least, supporting this move. And I guess to me, what that seemed to say pretty clearly is that these organizations were actually involved in organizing. And actually, what's important about it is they're praising Ukraine's incursion into Russia. The change in strategy, which has seen Ukraine put troops, over the border, attacking centuries-old Russian towns and stuff that have, been recognized Russian territory for centuries. Very different steps of escalation, you could say. And these two, obviously very influential intelligence agencies are coming out and supporting it. To me, that seemed to say the intelligence apparatus of, the state imperial apparatus that these, organizations are ultimately a part of is directing this in a way that they signaled they weren't directing things earlier in Ukraine. They signaled that they were upset with how things were going in Ukraine and that the Ukrainians weren't listening to them enough and they were just doing whatever they wanted and they weren't being very successful on the battlefield. And so now there's a joint press conference with the US and UK spy chiefs, and also they released a joint Financial Times article. Actually, the press conference was at, what is it? FT Weekend Festival, Financial Times Fest. That's for people who really like to have a good time. Anyway, that was my thought. And the next thought I had was, well, I guess I'm not totally sure that this is kind of a unique thing. So let me look into it a little more. I started reading the article more, and it was, describing it as an unprecedented joint conference between, the quote-unquote spy chiefs. They keep saying spy chiefs. I think they really want them to sound cool as opposed to saying CIA head, because people have a certain opinion of the heads of the CIA as opposed to spies. So, anyway, given that, I decided, okay, well, maybe it would be a better video to watch this. That didn't work. Hold on. Maybe it would be a better video to watch this hour-long. I guess you can't see it. So I thought maybe it would be a better video to watch this hour-long press conference and kind of do a live react and see how that turns out. So that's what I'm doing today. And I guess it's going to be more work for me and a whole lot more work for you guys. So, thanks. Ain't in the process. Trying to tippy-toe through the progress. Tongue-tied when the truth is an object. What's the pros and the cons of this next check? Wasn't nobody around, I was independent. Alright. Make sure that's good. Okay, let me check. Okay, so now we're back. Oh, also I have my leftover Cracker Barrel because I'm hungry. I'm a hungry guy. And now, okay, I got time. Text message from Trump. I'm in the motorcade now. Will you chip in $10 for a record-breaking rally blitz? I love these texts. I don't know if it's focusing or not, but I love these texts. I've been getting these for so long. And I love them. Okay, so I guess hold on. Let me full screen this. Bink. And I guess we'll just watch this, huh? Hopefully hold on. Let me turn this down. Okay, hopefully it's not coming through the audio too much. It's definitely coming through a little bit, but hopefully if I denoise it, it's fine, but I guess don't want to have to denoise it too much, because then it'll sound funky. Should I do this differently? Should I put headphones on? Wait, I don't know if I can do headphones with it on the TV. Can I? It's fine. It's probably not a problem. Here, I can turn the captions on. Oh, no, I can't. Great. I can't turn the captions on. So we're just here. We're waiting for this to start. Killing time. I'm not going to skip it. We're just going to let it run. Unless it takes a while. How you guys doing? Good? Ham? Ham was one of those things when I was a kid. I kind of like, decided that I didn't really like and was just like, I don't like that, Because my general first experience with ham as such would have been like
sandwich meat, and my mom would probably typically make a turkey sandwich, and I always really like turkey, and so I guess probably it was kind of like one of those things where it's like you're expecting like turkey, and then it tastes different, obviously it's ham, and you're just like, that's not what I wanted, and so
like, I don't like ham. I don't like a ham sandwich. And so
ham was definitely one of those things where like, and then like, if it's like I'm at breakfast or something, like, you want ham?
What? No, I don't like ham. Why would I like ham? Ham good. It's good. It's
like sausage, and bacon, and pork chops. I've always liked pig meat, it's always been good. Just never ham. My mom never made like a roast ham or anything like that. And so that's probably, I guess, another thing where like, it was just never something we particularly, like I had an experience with.
It's... I just realized how much I've been talking. Now, I just have to hope that the phone doesn't run out of storage, because I feel like it might be close to full, so this might not go so well. I just love how they didn't edit this down. Like, what is it? It's already been 5 minutes. Like, you can't cut this? You can't... You can't cut this? Good thing I can cut this.
Welcome back.
Oh shit!
Arrived in good time because Hawaii on the program.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to.
The prime 12 noon slot in the Big Ideas tent has had a blank space next to it. Well, I can reveal the reason why.
What's
it's
the
been
reason?
top secret because it involves two people who indeed have spent their careers, their lifetimes being top secret.
So this
and
was
they're
a
about to be interviewed, having
surprise?
a debate on foreign policy by the FT editor.
I hate how
Rita
cringy
Haraf.
these people
so
are,
who should we
right?
be talking to? Richard Moore, who is the head of MI6,
MI6,
the UK's
confirmed.
intelligence agency, and also William J. Burns, the director of the
He
CIA.
he literally has a
Central
CIA
Intelligence
director name.
Agency
William
in the
Burns?
US.
Are
So
you
without
kidding
further
me?
ado, let's see what
Burns?
secrets
That's
our
the Simpsons guy,
ruler
right?
can get them to spill.
Wow. I can't believe that they kept this a secret. Like, that just feels so cringy. It feels like they're like, what would be cool is if we were surprise guests, if we were the surprise celebrity guest. Very cringy. Anyway, that's how I feel. Look at those couches. You can't have a chair. Oh, I guess maybe there's multiple people. Okay, fair enough.
Well, welcome to the mystery session. We had to, for obvious reasons,
For obvious
had to
reasons.
keep the session very hush-hush because we have two very hush-hush
Because what? Would people come to try to, like,
officials who are
assassinate
joining
it? What
us.
is...
Please join me in welcoming Bill Burns,
It's just...
who
They're
is the head of the
bureaucrats.
CIA,
It's so
And
corny.
and Richard Moore,
So corny.
head of MI5.
I don't like
MI6.
feeling shit on my shoulders. I like when it's off my shoulders, but then I'm like, I don't want it to be like, look like I'm trying to be so sexy, you know? Like, I'm not trying to be sexy. If you're wanking right now,
Their
like,
presence
shame
is
on
what
you.
accounts
Like,
for
literally
a lot more
shame on
security
you.
than usual.
So they get to sit next to each
Thank
other.
you.
There's
both
4
for being with
cans
us.
there? Are those cans?
Don't often come out of the shadows, and I think I am right in
Is there supposed to be
saying
someone
that
else
this
there?
is the very first time that
me.
the heads of your two agencies have
But no, I don't
Well,
think we've
wait.
ever appeared in public together. I think
on a global
So they've
scale,
never...
That would
Yeah,
be
so,
on a
so this is
stage
literally
together.
unprecedented public...
So why?
They don't have coasters for
Why
those
did you
cans
agree
also.
to this? I mean, I'm delighted, but
Those look like I can
I know
see
you
the
have a very
condensation
special
from here, I feel
relationship,
like. And
but
they don't
why did
have
you
coasters for
agree
those
to
wooden
this? Is
tables.
it
Those
because
tables
of the
look so
state of
nice.
the world? Is it because of the state of American politics? Is it because some people think that, American support for European security has peaked? Tell me why.
I guess, well, we might ask ourselves the same question in half an hour, really, mightn't we? But no, I think, in all seriousness, it's important for both of us in the 21st century, in a democracy, to come out and talk a bit about the work that our services do.
by definition, we can't go into a lot of the detail of what our brilliant organisations do, but we can give some sense of what we're working on,
Brilliant
priorities.
organisations.
And I think that's really important to sort of earn your license to operate in a democracy.
Yeah,
Plus,
we
it's a
need
great
a
way of
license
attracting talent
to be
and
a
helping
completely
people to-
secret
No,
military
wait a minute.
force
This is like a recruitment.
Um,
drive?
So yeah, you never know. You
with
never
a
know.
completely secret
Maybe
budget,
one
as
or
she
two people beyond
mentioned.
this tent.
And
then
so
finally,
basically,
I
this is a
think,
PR stunt.
For us, this relationship,
From their
and we
perspective?
might go on to that in a minute.
That's what he's saying, at
this
least.
relationship is so important
That's his
to both
pitch.
of us that we thought it was a good opportunity to showcase that as well.
No, I agree. I mean, this is the first.
We've done this publicly, the two of us, but we've actually done this same kind of conversation in front of each of our workforces, in Langley as well as in London.
Because I think our partnership does matter enormously to both of our services, but I think also to both of our countries. We have no better foreign partner in the world, my agency doesn't, than SIS. This is a
Tom
moment
Hanks
when
looking
those
ass.
partnerships in a very complicated and contested world
Land that
matters
plane,
more
Sully.
than ever. And I have great personal respect for Richard. I don't think there's been a better example
Yeehaw, Woody.
of the significance of our partnership than the run-up to the war in Ukraine. Going back to the fall of 2021, the two of us together, our services together, were able to provide credible, early, accurate warning of the invasion that was coming, which was not a small thing at the time because almost all of the other services around
Frankly,
the world, our intelligence counterparts, thought this was
Like,
a
it can't be
bluff
that
on
hard
Putin's part.
to
I
watch
think that
the
good
Russians
intelligence enabled,
mobilize an invasion
our
force.
leaders, our political leaderships to
like,
mobilize a very
"Oh,
strong
they're gonna
coalition
invade."
to counter Putin's aggression. It helped the Ukrainians to defend
Like, you
themselves.
just
And
need
then
a
the two of
satellite
us
for that.
together
You need
employed
some people looking
at
at
the
satellite
direction of our
pictures.
political
You need
leaders
one person on
a
payroll.
novel approach to declassify some of our secrets in that period.
As a way of denying Putin the false narratives that I had watched him over so many years employ in the past, and to expose the reality that this was naked aggression on the part of Russia. And so our ability to do that, I think, put Putin in the unaccustomed and uncomfortable position of being on the wrong foot.
And that was another demonstration of the importance of this partnership.
I want to get to.
I hate the kind of
we will
cuck
get
ass
to Ukraine
motherfuckers who are
in a
just so
minute,
excited to
but let's just
clap
talk
and
for a sec
cheer
about
for the most
this
powerful people in the
famous,
world.
special relationship. I'm
Sorry.
interested in how does it work, to the extent that you can tell us. Do you share everything? How do you divvy up the world? Which regions
almost everything.
which regions
Almost.
does Richard have particular
Lizard jumped out.
strengths?
So it's a partnership which covers the full gamut of our activities. So
We absolutely share intelligence across all of the main subjects we work on, and we will share more with each other than we will do with anyone else because of the high levels of trust that built up over many, many years. Of course, it goes back in one form or another over a century. So
that's pretty clear. But it goes much more than that. We do operations together. We will look at operational opportunities and we'll sometimes decide who's better placed to go for that operation. We call it the best athlete model. You know, whoever is the best athlete model, whoever is best placed to go after that, and we try and do that in a non-competitive way, which will get the result for both of us. So
I think that really opens up an interesting idea, which I think about a lot with regards to like describing, you know, the like American empire, you know, because it's easy to say America is the center of the world empire. That's undoubtable. And certainly it's, you know, the main mass of its might. But it's not as easy as saying, like, for instance, the British Empire was the British Empire. Because wherever the British had colonial control, they claimed it very openly and clearly and defended that explicitly. But the, you know, key development in American imperialism, of course, is to allow countries nominal freedom to say, look, you know, you're Germany, you know, you lost the war, but we're just gonna we're just gonna split your country into 4 pieces and occupy it while you guys get better. And then you guys will just be Germany, and like it'll be great. And all of you know, Vietnam. I don't know, I'm not thinking of good examples right now. There's so many resources that I could link to or point to. And maybe I'll try to figure something out while I'm editing. But anyway, it's just the idea that, like, you know, like it's very difficult to describe an empire in this form of imperialism, which is of course the goal of doing it this way, because obviously America has much less control over what is often called neo-colonies than something like Britain had over its traditional colonies. And so you're giving up something, but you have to gain something in return. And I think it's important in looking at that to recognize that England and, you know, the UK represents a very special case, it seems, at least from my perspective. It has always seemed that it's almost like it's like the 51st state, or in other words, it's almost like the capital of the empire is both London and Washington, D.C. And it's almost as if like the British Empire like saved itself from dying completely by being reanimated by the American Empire. I don't know. Doesn't exactly make the most sense, which is why I've never really fleshed out the idea too much. But I guess that's always the way I think about it. Is like there's some way in which like it's almost like England is the capital, or like the UK is the capital, but also not, because they don't actually have control. And so it's almost like I guess I think about them like old Rome, like they're old Rome. Yeah. And of course, in the Roman Empire, there were many ages in which, you know, the power, you know, the most powerful people didn't come from Rome. They came from all sorts of different provinces, and that would shift over time based on where the power was centered. So I think the lizard just took a shit. So I'm gonna have to clean the lizard shit really quick. Ding 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 ding. Great. Well, I guess let's keep doing this. Talk.
So, and then finally,
Oh
I would
wait,
say we
no, I wanted to do the clap. I wanted to do the clap when I came back. Hold on. 3, 2, 1. Anyway, we're gonna watch these two knuckleheads. These two doofuses. Doofi. Anyway, go ahead.
competitive way which will get the result for both of us. So, and then finally, I would say we build capability together. We develop the sort of operational technology that we need together. We copied, in many ways, the agency. The agency was the first to go with Incutel into the world of looking to partner with venture capital, with startup tech, and with big tech.
Yeah, I'm
And we
very
have the
excited
National
that
Security Strategic
the
Investment
intelligence
Fund,
agencies are
doing the same sort of thing.
partnering
So
with venture
across all of
capital
those things,
and
we
big
collaborate
tech.
very closely.
I actually have a specific question on this for Bill. Of course, the CIA is 7 times bigger in terms of staffing. But are there capabilities that Richard has that you either wish you had? I mean, does he have something you don't actually have?
We will test the limits of partnership here.
Tension.
No, I mean,
Tom
as Richard
Hanks,
said,
are you
honestly,
jelly?
we learn a lot from one another at this moment.
The geopolitical landscape, which is, in 40 years in public service in the United States, it's as complicated a moment as I've seen. And added to that is the revolution of technology, which is changing the way we live, work, fight, and compete across human society. But it's also transforming the profession of intelligence, too. And so, as Richard said, we learn from one another as we grapple with a lot of those challenges.
Learn from one another in other areas, too. How we recruit, new officers for both of our agencies. How we ensure that we have diverse workforces, because, we live in a world where that is not only the smart thing to do, it's also the right thing to do in terms of our workforce.
And I want to get to AI a bit later on in our conversation. Richard, let's talk about your adversaries. There are exchanges of military technology between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. But do they also share intelligence? And is this becoming a more institutionalized relationship, alliance? How do you think about it?
So,
I have to check the lizard's belly because she got really sick and had yellow fungus all on her belly. And we didn't know because we weren't checking. And we thought she was just kind of not doing much because it was winter, because in winter they don't do much. But then it started becoming spring and she was still not doing much. And then we figured out she was very sick. But then we took her to the vet and we gave her the medicine and we syringe fed her like some like mixed powdered powder and water food for a while. And now she's all better. And now she's a little guy and we upgraded her tank. I won't show you now because I'm gonna make a video showing basically all that. But we upgraded her tank and now it's super cool. And we're gonna upgrade it even more. We're not actually done yet. I'm very slow when it comes to doing projects. There's too many to do. Okay, what was this doofus head talking about?
China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. But do they also share intelligence? And is this becoming a more institutionalized relationship, alliance? How do you think about it?
So I think, how do I think about it? How would I frame it? We see a
lot of pragmatic cooperation between those countries. You can see it, of course, sadly, on the battlefield in Ukraine. You can see North Korean weaponry, you can see Iranian drones, you can see the sort of help that the Chinese have provided through sort of dual-use type
material. You see all of that
But is it
playing
more
out. And
opportunistic,
in
you
our
think?
world, there are signs clearly of them cooperating and yes, we have to recognize that and sharing some experience. I would just say it's of a completely, profoundly different quality to the type of relationship that we have across the two services, to the type of relationship we have within the Five Eyes community, the type of relationship we have with other friendly services, for example, ourselves across Europe. I mean, the same would be true for Bill. That's different because it's based on values. The thing that's driving the cooperation between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea is not based on shared values. It's on a sort of rather darker, more pragmatic basis.
I just hate that these people expect me to believe. What am I even supposed to say? What am I supposed to say? You expect me to believe that all of the countries in Europe share intelligence with the United States because they have shared values? Not because they're under a power system? See, actually, that's what's interesting, is that genuinely it is different. And the difference is that the intelligence sharing between Russia and China and North Korea is much more so a mutualistic relationship. Whereas, like he's saying, there's a mutual relationship. At least he thinks there's a mutual relationship. The British guy's the one who keeps saying that their relationship is special. And so I think England has, for them, a special relationship with the United States. And of course, the United States would like them to believe that. But of course, like she said, CIA is 7 times bigger than MI6. And it's obviously going to be bigger than every other intelligence agency in the entire world. And so that means that the United States has power. They're not just teammates being like, oh, we have the same goal, overthrowing a worldwide oppressor. We have, shared interests because the power structure I'm in as a UK is I'm under you, the US. And so, of course, I'm going to get as good a deal as I can with you. And the same with France, and the same with Germany, and the same with yada, yada, yada.
I'm sorry, the only thing I would add, Rula, is that on that subject is that it is nonetheless troubling. I mean, we see the way in which China and Russia, Russia, Iran, Russia, North Korea are working together. They're two-way streets, the defense partnerships. It imposes a real danger on innocent Ukrainian civilians, but it also poses danger, because it's a two-way street, to friends and partners in the Middle East, too.
So does the cooperation of the US and the UK in helping Ukraine on the battlefield endanger Russian civilians when Ukraine invades Russia?
In the case of Russia and Iran. The other thing I'd say, though, as troubling as it is, we do have to keep it in perspective because, historically there's a fair amount of mistrust between Russia and China.
Much as Russia didn't chafe at the idea of being the junior partner of the United States after the end of the Cold War, it's a safe prediction that over time Russians are going to chafe at being the junior partner of China, too.
So it is troubling. We're both very well aware of this. And do the best we can to provide our policymakers with insights on how best to deal with it.
We always seem to be on the cusp of, China providing direct military aid to Russia, but
that's what they'd like us to believe.
Not quite. Has that moment already arrived? Do you see any direct military assistance?
Well, I'd say two things. First, I don't think either of us see direct evidence today, as we sit here, of the provision of weapons and munitions from China to Russia for use in the war effort in Ukraine. But we see lots of things just short of that, as Richard said, in terms of dual-use items, the kind of things that have enabled Putin over the course of the last 18 months or so to significantly rebuild his defense industrial base. And that poses a real danger.
What about
the pipeline, the gas pipeline? Do you think that the Russians will ever, do you see it, that this pipeline will ever be completed? The one that would provide gas to China? We've had some theories about that. I think because of the sanctions, because after the invasion of Ukraine, because of the way that Europe in particular is reorienting away from Russia as a supplier, they would like to see something of that kind. But of course, it's a huge logistical infrastructural effort, and I think they're a long way away. It's much easier to move stuff which is fungible, like oil, and put it in ships. And one of the things that we're focused on is trying to identify and reduce Russia's ability to use so-called ghost ships to circumnavigate and get around sanctions. So I think they might aspire to it, but it seems to me to be quite some way off. So on Russia, Iran, you mentioned that as well. We have seen some military hardware.
But has Iran sent ballistic missiles to Russia yet.
I mean, all I will say on that is that should Iran ship ballistic missiles of whatever kind, close range or other kinds, it would be a dramatic escalation of the nature of that defense partnership.
But it hasn't yet.
All I'll say is that it would be a dramatic escalation.
So do we have a
Still have
dramatic
it,
escalation as we
just,
speak?
on the, it's really important to remind ourselves, isn't it? With the drones that we definitely know are there. I mean, if stuff goes onto the battlefield, Rula, it will become very obvious very quickly. I mean, this stuff lands.
That was what I was thinking. I was like, the way what's he leaving himself room for? And I was thinking, I guess maybe the situation is that Iran has sent ballistic missiles to Russia, but they're saying this so that Russia doesn't use them, because if Russia uses them on the battlefield, then it's an obvious news story. But if it doesn't use it on the battlefield, then, it's as if it didn't happen. And so I guess I was thinking that must be what he was saying. And then it seems like, based on what British Toady said, that he was saying something about them being used on the battlefield.
It's really important to remind ourselves, isn't it? With the drones that we definitely know are there. I mean, if stuff goes onto the battlefield, Rula, it will become very obvious.
Yeah, his follow-up is, if or when stuff is used on the battlefield, it will become very obvious. Yep, that's pretty clear.
Very quickly. I mean, this stuff lands, it explodes, it kills Ukrainian civilians, it destroys their electricity infrastructure. And that's the thing you have to remind us. This is what Iran is choosing to do. It is choosing to help Russia to do these types of
And then the question is, what would Russia be sending to Iran?
Well, as I said, it's a two-way street. Russia
has the ability to do a number of things that help perfect Iran's ballistic missiles that make them more dangerous for use against our friends and partners across the Middle East. I think the same is true with Russia and North Korea. North Korea, we know, is already providing short-range ballistic missiles that are used on the battlefield in Ukraine. And that experience is going to make them more dangerous threats to our allies in Japan and South Korea as well. So it's a really troubling set of developments. So let's talk about Ukraine.
Ukraine. This has been the area of intense cooperation between you. Richard, what is the victory plan in Ukraine? The approach sometimes looks to me to be that at some point, Western demonstration of resolve will make Putin give up. But is that sustainable? Is it even working inside Russia?
I think it's totally sustainable. It's absolutely critical that we do sustain our support to Ukraine. And it's really difficult. It's hard. And particularly
in eastern Ukraine, this is attritional warfare where there is a huge amount of suffering on both sides. And Putin is pushing forward a sort of attritional Pyrrhic campaign of taking village by village as he goes forward. When he takes those, there's nothing left. And that's why I deliberately use the term Pyrrhic. There is nothing left because everything is utterly destroyed. But that is the Kremlin way of war. That's what they did in Grozny, it's what they did in Aleppo, and it's what they're now doing in it. So it is tough, but it's also important to remember that our Ukrainian friends have an absolute will to fight.
And it's important to remember how this started. This started in this phase with Putin mounting a war of aggression in February 2022. And 2.5 years later, that failed. It continues to fail. The Ukrainians will continue to fight. We will continue to help them to fight. And it's difficult, there's no doubt at all. But a final comment, the move into Kursk, it's too early to say how long the Ukrainians will be able to hang on in there and how that will
Do you think that was a good idea, the move into Kursk?
Say it again, Rita.
Was that a good idea?
I think it's typically audacious and bold on the part of the Ukrainians to try and change the game in a way. And I think they have, to a degree, changed the narrative around this. As we were saying, Putin pushing forward, grinding forward, village by village, and just having a sort of mentality that I'll just hang on to what I grab. I'm not interested in negotiations. I'll just gradually increase it. The Ukrainians, by going in and taking Kursk, have really brought the war home to ordinary Russians. They are now. He has gone into this war 2.5 years ago. Not only has he seen things like NATO get 2 more members, he's now lost a part of his own territory. So I think
But what he's not pointing out is that also ruins the whole idea of a Ukrainian victory, which is that the war becomes unsustainable for Moscow to support. So if the war is all of a sudden brought home to ordinary Russians, people who didn't want to go fight a war against Ukraine, and that was what was going to make this untenable for Putin, was because his population was against the war. That was the whole point of the sanctions, to try to starve the population so that they would rebel, just like we've been trying to do to Cuba and Venezuela and whatever. So how exactly does it make you closer to that point if you all of a sudden tell ordinary Russians that they actually have something to lose? Like, there's just nothing else to say except for that it undoubtedly makes Putin's position stronger. Like, does it make Russia's position stronger? I don't know. Does it make Putin's position stronger? Absolutely. And there can't be a question about that. Unless you're just a complete doofus, which this guy kind of reads like major doofus coded. I don't know about the Tom Hanks guy. I think he's good at not letting on what he thinks. I think the Tom Hanks guy, I think he's but this guy, I feel like he's just like so excited to be there. Yeah. He's like, I did so well on the test and they let me be MI6 captain. And now I'm here with an unprecedented press conference with William Burns. Is that the guy's name? With CIA Director Burns. Boy, gee, they're gonna write my name down in the books, they are. That's, it is William Burns, the other guy. This is Richard Moore. That's how I see Richard Moore. Anyway.
We'll have to see how it develops, but I think it's bold and it clearly, we should be supporting our Ukrainian friends.
So, Bill, I wanted to just ask you to comment on something specific, about Putin. You've written that the Ukraine war is quietly corroding Putin's power, but also that his grip doesn't seem likely to weaken anytime soon. So, which is it? Sometimes it seems to us that the Prigozhin rebellion was more of a time off, was more as a one-off.
I mean, I think what you've seen first, as Richard said, is the Kursk Offensive is a significant tactical achievement. It's not only been a boost in Ukrainian morale, it has exposed some of the vulnerabilities of Putin's Russia and of his military. Much as Prigozhin's short-lived mutiny a little more than a year ago did as well, it did raise questions on the part of people we could see across the Russian elite about where is this all headed. And that underscores the point Richard made that, Putin's whole narrative right now is a very cocky, very smug one. It's time's on my side. It's only a matter of time before the Ukrainians are going to be ground down and all of their supporters in the West are going to be worn down, and I'll be able to dictate my terms for a settlement. And I think, what these events have done, the Kursk Offensive most recently, is to put a dent in that narrative. And it does raise questions in the Russian elite about what is all this for. If you remember the video that Prigozhin released the Friday morning of his mutiny, was as scathing an indictment as I've seen from anyone about Putin's conduct of the war. He said first, and this is...
How much do you want to bet the CIA funded Prigozhin's rebellion? I'm just fucking saying.
Someone who was very close to Putin and an intimate in this regime. He said three things. First, that there was no Ukrainian threat that prompted this war. That's all a lie. Second, he said, the military conduct of the war, Russian generalship, has been abysmal. And third, he said that corruption is the root of this political system. And that, we could see at the time, created some debate within the Russian elite. The Kursk Offensive has prompted that too. Does that mean that Putin's on his last legs? No, I don't think either of us would.
Do you see his grip on power weakening?
I'll start. I don't see any evidence today that Putin's grip on power is weakening. He does one thing really well, and that's repress people at home.
Yeah, I would just don't ever confuse a tight grip with a stable grip. For somebody who's lost a chunk of his country, who has seen a mercenary group that he, fostered, march halfway up the road to Moscow, yes, absolutely, he's got a very tight grip, but that doesn't mean quite the same thing as being unstable.
So let's talk about a slight difference in the way that your two governments have approached the war. I'm going to take Storm Shadows, for example. The UK seemingly thinks that these long-range missiles should be used against targets inside Russia. The US seemingly doesn't, and favors, it's always favored more of a sort of drip-drip approach to Ukraine military aid. I want to quote something that Lawrence Friedman said about escalation. He said, the Americans are caught in a trap of their own making, and they don't know how to get out of it. Now, Bill, you can tell us, perhaps, if you know something about Russian escalation that Richard doesn't know.
About Russian
escalation that I don't know.
No, listen.
Is there something you're not sharing with Richard about Russian escalation?
There's nothing I'm not sharing with Richard.
I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this difference.
Yeah. No, well, first, I mean, I would take issue a little bit with the comment that you cited. I mean, the United States has provided massive support for Ukraine throughout this war, and we will continue to. President Biden has been very clear about that.
Yeah, because they're stuck.
And, that has enabled the Ukrainians to fight with such courage and tenacity.
Until the average age of the army is 50.
Lightly the risks of escalation. There was a moment in the fall of 2022 when I think there was a genuine risk of the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons. I have never thought, however, and this is the view of my agency, that we should be unnecessarily intimidated by that. Putin's a bully. He's going to continue to saber rattle from time to time. The president sent me to talk to one of our Russian counterparts, Sergei Narishkin, at the end of 2022 to make very clear what the consequences of that kind of escalation would be. And we've continued to be very direct about that. So I don't think we can afford to be intimidated by that saber rattling or bullying. We got to be mindful of it. But I think the record shows that,
So what he's saying is, number one, we have and are going to continue to fund Ukraine. And number two, that we can't allow ourselves to be intimidated by Russian saber rattling. Which means he's saying we have to defend Ukraine. We have no choice. And it means that whenever Russia's saber rattling, obviously what it means to act intimidated is to back down. So if he's saber rattling, we have to rattle back and we have to prove we're not intimidated, which means, like the quote she presented, the Americans are stuck in a trap and they don't know how to get out. And they're stuck defending Ukraine. They have to defend Ukraine. Europe's not going to do it by themselves, and the American idea of the powerful nation that can defend anything anywhere on the globe falls apart in one step if Ukraine falls. So they can't let Ukraine fall because they've decided that they won't. And they've made a public show about the fact that they won't. And the fact that they'd clearly rather go to direct war with Russia than let Ukraine fall. That seemed, as far as I don't know if that's necessarily like exactly what they've said, but it seems like that's probably a direct implication from the official statements that like the White House and State Department have made, that they would go to war with Russia, directly with Russia, if they needed to defend Ukraine. At least, certainly that's what Russia understands, and that's what the rest of the world understands. Anyway. So, yeah. I like this interviewer. She's got some good questions, which is great. It's always good when that happens. It doesn't happen that often.
The United States has provided enormous support to Ukraine. I'm sure we'll continue to, and I'm sure the president will consider other ways in which we can be supportive in the months ahead.
I mean, it's really
Richard,
hard to argue.
would you like the US to be less cautious?
It's really hard to argue with the plain facts of the amount of financial contribution and the amount of military material that has been provided by the Ukraine, and the lion's share is from the United States. So, and on my comment on the escalation thing is that there's only one party here who is talking about nuclear escalation.
I love how their response to "Are you trapped in Ukraine?" basically, their response is, "Look, we've spent so much money on Ukraine. What are you talking about?"
Talking about nuclear stuff, and it is Putin, and it is deeply irresponsible and reckless. No one else is, and as Bill said, nobody in the West is going to be intimidated by such talk or any other behavior by the Russian state.
Because we all recognise we've got to stay in this, and we have to try and help the Ukrainians to restore their independence and sovereignty.
So there is another issue which I think you've been dealing with, both of you, and several agencies in Europe as well. As you wrote in today's FT, you're working to disrupt the reckless campaign of sabotage across Europe being waged by Russian intelligence. How are you doing that? Because many of these attacks seem to be carried out by proxy, so there's always deniability. How do you deter them?
Well, you do it by, I'll go first, Bill. I mean, you do it by really good, old-fashioned security and intelligence work. You do it by identifying the Russian intelligence.
This guy thinks he does such a good job.
The criminal elements that they are using. The fact that they are using criminal elements shows you that they're becoming a bit desperate. They can't
use their own people, they have to do it through criminal elements. Criminals do stuff for cash. You know, they're not reliable, they're not particularly professional, and therefore, usually, we're able to roll them up pretty effectively. And that's
More amateurish in a way.
Sorry again?
It's become a bit more amateurish.
Well, it's not amateurish, it's just a bit more reckless. I mean, I think Russian intelligence services have gone a bit feral, frankly, in some of their behaviour. In the UK...
this is not new. You know, those of us, we will all very well remember 2018 and Salisbury. And if you think about not just the attack, but the fact that those intelligence officers, in that case Russian military intelligence, left a large file of a deadly nerve agent, Novichok, lying around to be picked up and killed in an entire school. In fact, it killed an innocent British civilian. So I'm afraid it is...
rather emblematic of their approach to these things. It's really important that some of the reckless end of this is dealt with. But we're on it, and we're working together, and it's a classic example of partnership, actually.
It is, and you know, amateurish can actually be more reckless and more dangerous as well. And so sharing intelligence with our allies and partners, not just between us, and then working together to disrupt a lot of those plots, I think, is the best way to deal with it, and that's what we're very effectively engaged in.
It is one way to deter stepping up your own sabotage operations, your own cyber operations.
Effectively engaged in.
It is one way to deter stepping up your own sabotage operations, your own cyber operations. I mean, I don't expect you to give me details, but in general, as a general principle.
That was a dumb question.
I'm glad you're not expecting us to go into detail. I mean, it's just, I'm struggling a bit, really.
Because where we use cyber as a tool in our business, of course, we are doing it to collect intelligence to disrupt terrorist groups. It's just of a different order to what I was just describing in my earlier answer.
There is one area of sabotage which I think we hear about, but we're never quite certain. So the head of the U.S. Army's Northern Command said recently that there are more Russian military intelligence agents in Mexico than in any foreign country. Is there any sign that Russia is facilitating illegal migration into the U.S. across the Mexican border? Is that something that you've seen?
It's something we're very sharply focused on, along with our domestic, law enforcement counterparts as well. Part of this is a function of the fact that so many Russian intelligence officers have been kicked out of Europe over the course of the 2.5 years after the war. So they're looking for places to go and looking for places in which they can operate. But we're very sharply focused on that.
I want to move to the Middle East. Bill, you have been intimately involved and spent endless hours in trying to get a ceasefire and hostage deal.
I just want to pause on that because the Democrats would have loved to be able to say the CIA director said. The CIA director said immigration's a problem because of Putin. Okay. And obviously Putin's doing that to elect Trump. The Democrats would have loved that so much. she really did her best for them there. Uh, and unfortunately, CIA Hanks had nothing to say about that.
in Gaza, trying to get a. I want to move to the Middle East. Bill, you have been intimately involved and spent endless hours in trying to get a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza. What is the obstacle to reaching a deal? If American officials often blame Hamas. If you read the Israeli papers, then Netanyahu appears to be the obstacle.
Well, let me take a step back first. I mean, you know, at the end of last May, President Biden put on the table a three-phase framework, which would ultimately, if all three phases were realized, get to the release of all hostages in exchange for a very large number of Palestinian prisoners, a permanent ceasefire, the withdrawal of the Israeli Defense Forces from Gaza, and then the reconstruction of Gaza. The focus since then has been very much on the first phase, 6 weeks of ceasefire, the release of a number of Israeli hostages for a large number of Palestinian prisoners, and then a very significant infusion of desperately needed humanitarian assistance into Gaza. We're working very hard with the Egyptians and the Qataris, the two mediators right now, to try to refine that framework, add more details to it, and put it in a form, a good enough proposal, because in all my years of experience negotiating in the Middle East, perfect is never on the menu, but a good enough proposal that both leaderships will see the value of moving ahead. I cannot sit here today with all of you and say that we're going to succeed in that. I cannot tell you how close we are right now. It is a fact that if you look at the written text, 90% of the paragraphs have been agreed to, but in any negotiation I've been involved in, the last 10% is the last 10% for a reason, because it's the hardest part to do. So all I can say is three things. First, we will continue to work as hard as we can with the other mediators on this, because there's no good alternative to getting to that ceasefire and the release of hostages. Second, I think we all have to remember what's at stake here. There's a lot at stake, of course, for Palestinians and Israelis and their future. There's a lot at stake strategically in a region that has no shortage of fragilities or dysfunctions right now, or dangers of escalation. But above all, what's at stake in human terms? You know, for the hostages who are still alive, who are living in hellish conditions in tunnels beneath Gaza, for their families, you know, and here
What about
I think
the Palestinians
of
in
the
those
parents
conditions?
of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was executed a week ago by Hamas, along with 5 other hostages, Rachel and John, who are among the bravest people I've ever met. But then at the same time, I also think of countless mothers and fathers in Gaza who are dealing with their own terrible losses, who are dealing with a humanitarian situation which is getting worse every day as well. So, you know, this is not an abstraction for those of us dealing with this. This is not just about brackets in a negotiating text. It's about real human beings. And the last thing I would say is, as hard as we're going to work on texts and creative formulas for finding that good enough proposal, and hopefully that'll happen in the coming days, we have to all remember that despite all of that work that needs to be done, this is ultimately a question of political will. And this gets to your question. Whether or not leaders on both sides are prepared to recognize that enough is enough, and that the time has come finally to make some hard choices and some difficult compromises. I hope profoundly that both of those leaders are going to make that decision, because as I said, there's an enormous amount at stake here, in human as well as...
Do you think that decision has not been made by the two parties?
Well, I think, you know, we will make this more detailed proposal, I hope, in the next several days, and then we'll see. And my hope is that, you know, they'll recognize what...
It's so funny how the U.S. just keeps being like, well, what about this proposal? And Netanyahu's like, no, I'm here to blow up the war. I'm here to blow up the negotiations and keep the war going. And so the only thing you can assume is that the U.S. is just so completely powerless and cucked. Or they want the war to keep going, and they want this to expand into a wider war, just like Netanyahu does. And they just want the deniability to be able to say Netanyahu is the one who wants this blowing up into a wild war. We're trying to get peace. We keep sending over these peace deals. But if the U.S. actually wanted peace and didn't want this to spiral into World War III, they would do it now. Because like Iran said, they reserve the right to retaliate. They're saying they won't. They won't retaliate for an assassination on their soil in Tehran. They won't retaliate if there's a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. If the U.S. isn't seriously pushing for that, then the U.S. is accepting Iran presenting a major retaliation, which will give Israel all it needs to do everything that's required to start World War III. So that's the position of the United States, it seems.
What's at stake here, and be willing to move ahead on that basis.
I mean, absolutely.
Absolutely. Clap it out.
Thank you for applauding what Bill just said, because he has put the most extraordinary amount of personal effort into this to try, and the human side of this is the thing that drives all of us.
He's such a
in
cock,
this business, to keep on trying. And beyond we're very clear that without getting to a ceasefire that gets those hostages home and stops the killing in Gaza, we will continue to be in this very highly fragile place in the Middle East with all the risks that go with that. And we have navigated, touch wood, again, past another crisis point between Israel and Iran. But as long as we don't get to a ceasefire, that risk is there. And for all the horror of Gaza, crisis point between Israel and the Middle East, with all the risks that go with that. And we have navigated, touch wood, again, past another crisis point between Israel and Iran.
Does he think that Iran said they wouldn't respond? Does he think that's over? Why would he say that? Wait. They haven't navigated. That active crisis is still an active crisis because Iran said we reserve the right to retaliate unless there's a ceasefire. And I don't know if this is news to you, but there hasn't been a ceasefire.
Would again past another crisis point between Israel and Iran. But as long as we don't get to a ceasefire, that risk is there. And for all the horror of Gaza, a wider conflagration in the Middle East would be vastly worse.
So, I mean, as you both know, in negotiations, you also have to put pressure on both parties, or you have to provide incentives for both parties. So in a way, sometimes you have to enforce the terms of a ceasefire, for example. Is the US, is the UK willing to put the pressure necessary to get a ceasefire?
I might let you have it.
Well, I mean, I think we have to be, and I think we have been. Just speaking for the policymakers in the U.S. administration, I think there has been a very hard push. The president himself has been very actively involved in all this. That's a critical role for the United States to play. I agree. And I believe, for the Egyptians, for the Qataris, for everyone else who has a stake in the horrific human conditions that we're all recognizing, anyone with any influence over Hamas has to push hard in that direction too. They should not want to be the obstacle in the path of the humanitarian assistance, the possibility of genuinely improving what are horrific conditions in Gaza.
What's your assessment, Bill, of Hamas's capabilities? Would you say
I mean, what is there really to say about at the same time lying and saying you are putting pressure on everybody, and at the same time really saying that Hamas is the only people that pressure needs to be put on? Yeah, he thinks we're dumb. I guess. Because he's not dumb. Presumably. He's not, presumably he understood her question was, don't you need to put pressure on Israel too? Of course, the United States position is, well, no, we're not going to put pressure on Israel. So we hope they do it. And, if you have leverage over Hamas, you should do it because the only leverage we have is sending Israel more bombs, and we can't do that. We would run out of bombs if we did that.
It's decimated, destroyed.
Genuinely improving what are horrific conditions in Gaza.
What's your assessment, Bill, of Hamas's capabilities? Would you say it's decimated, destroyed? What's your
capabilities.
assessment of Hamas's capabilities?
Well, I
Would
mean,
you
I
say
think-
it's decimated, destroyed?
I think over the last, what I will say is the following. I think over the last 11 months, what the Israelis have done in response to, as Richard said about Ukraine, you have to remember how this started. This started with a barbaric Hamas attack, which killed, hundreds and hundreds of innocent Israelis.
History started on October 7th.
I think what the Israeli military has succeeded in doing is severely degrading Hamas's military capabilities over the last 11 months. The problem with the term that's sometimes used about destroying Hamas is that it is of course true that Hamas is a despicable terrorist organization. You can severely degrade their military capabilities. It's also a movement and an idea. And in my experience, the only way you kill an idea is with a better idea. And that's why it's so crucial to offer some sense of hope for the day after, not just in Gaza, but for Palestinians and Israelis.
And that is the two-state solution.
Yeah.
It's always been
Yeah,
on the table, but appears to be as distant
elusive
as ever.
And I've been around this issue for a very long time, as has Richard. It is a very elusive goal. The only thing I would say is, show me what's a better alternative for Palestinians and Israelis to live together.
Maybe one non-apartheid state where everyone has equal rights. Have you considered equal rights? Honestly, the two-state solution thing is disgusting because, frankly, that's the most obvious statement of the fact that the United States position is the genocide of Palestinians. Because someone like this, the CIA director, there's no way that in hell that they don't know that that's impossible. That doesn't make any fucking sense. The Israelis think the river to the sea is Israel. The Palestinians think the river to the sea is Palestine. Do you know what that means? They all want to be able to live there and call it their home. So maybe an easier solution than chopping it up and saying, you guys can have some and you guys can have the rest. Maybe that was never going to be a good solution. Maybe that was never going to be acceptable to anybody. And the most powerful of those groups was obviously going to just continue pushing until they had control over the whole situation, which unfortunately, obviously, is the goal of this imperial project, is to create a Western settlement in the Middle East so that the American imperial system has a base that isn't hostile to them, and isn't able to, and also that the, you could call the post-Islamic world, I guess I'm not going to fuck up the camera to point. Actually, I'll do it. Why not? Oh, God. Oh, God. All of this, I can't even see that good, but all of this was the Islamic world. You know what they're afraid of? You know what the post-Christian world is afraid of? The post-Islamic world being like, oh, should we do empire together? And so that's why they're like, well, we just have to have a base there. We just have to, because we couldn't trust those dirty Arabs not to, I don't know. Hitting that whip. Okay. Looks good. Hopefully it's not too hot. It's probably fine. Okay. Let's do this. Oh shit, I gotta go soon. Okay, let's go.
Together in peace and security for both of them, and to do it in a way which is going to contribute to at least some hope for regional stability as well.
What is
I hate these motherfuckers clapping. I would never
Richard,
in my
I want to
life
ask you,
clap for that
what is
fucking
your
CIA doc. I
assessment
would
of
kill myself.
Iran's intentions? Do you think it will still Richard, I wanted to ask you, what is your assessment of Iran's intentions? Do you think it will still retaliate for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh? Because it said it would, and we haven't seen that yet.
I suspect they will try, and we won't be able to let our guard down for the type of activity that the Iranians might try and prosecute in that direction. And the Iranians have a whole playbook, a destabilizing playbook around their region.
He has nothing to say about the fact that Iran has said there's a way to stop them from retaliating, and that's a ceasefire. He has nothing to say about that. Then the question she didn't even seem to know that that was something that Iran had said. She didn't acknowledge it at all. That Iran said it's waiting to see if there's a ceasefire, and if it doesn't think there's going to be a ceasefire, then it will retaliate. That's what they've said. And I guess he just says, oh, well, we're prepared to defend against it.
And we see that in their sponsorship of Lebanese Hezbollah, in their support to Hamas, which enabled them to do the horrors that we saw on October the 7th, what they do with the Iraqi Shia militia who are under their control, what they do with the Houthis in terms of disrupting international shipping through the Red Sea. So that, and plus a track record of going after dissidents, including in this country, to try and kill them. So, we are dealing with a power that continues to try to intimidate its opponents and to take revenge for things that have happened to it. Yeah. So it remains a focus for both of us to try and understand this country and to try and understand the threats that might come out of Tehran.
So we've always talked about the risk of a regional war, and this year, I think we came very, very, very close to that, and the risk is still there. Do you think, Bill, that from an Israeli perspective, there is perhaps an intention or that they are not as worried today about a regional war as they might have been in the past?
I mean, my sense is there's genuine concern, certainly amongst the people that we deal with in the Israeli intelligence and security services, about the potential for a much wider regional conflict. And I think that's why a ceasefire in Gaza becomes so important. That's why it's also important to see what's possible if beyond even a ceasefire, if we're ever able to achieve that, you can take steps.
If we're ever able to achieve that, so you're saying maybe we'll get a ceasefire. Maybe there'll just be like kind of a war forever. Or maybe the Israelis will just kill all the Palestinians. And they'll have the river to the sea like they wanted, and then they won't have to worry about it. Which of course would start World War III.
Which could result in the normalization of relations, for example, between Saudi Arabia and Israel, that would in a way be the ultimate counter to the Iranian ambitions that Richard described before. So it is easy to be a pessimist about the Middle East. I've spent a lot of years working on this issue. The Middle East is a place where pessimists always feel right at home. But I think there is a possibility here, too, which strategically would offer not only Israel, but a lot of our friends in the Arab world, the ultimate counter to the ambitions of this particular Iranian regime.
And this is why the focus on the ceasefire is so important, because if you could get the ceasefire in Gaza, you have a chance to reverse the momentum. You have a chance to open up the potential for a deal over the blue line between Israel and Lebanon. You have a chance to address the disruption to international shipping and the Red Sea. A number of things flow, but we do need desperately, and it's why Bill and others devote so much unrelenting effort to trying to bring it to pass.
So there is one thing we have yet to talk about, and that is the biggest issue for both of you, and that is China.
China.
Which you both consider to be the biggest, the most significant strategic challenge and intelligence challenge. And your agencies dedicate more resources to China than to anywhere else. So my first question is, are the U.S. export controls as effective as you would like, Bill? Or has China been very effective at circumventing them, including getting hold of the most advanced NVIDIA chips?
No, I mean, I think what this administration has done in that area, recognizing that in a way the revolution in technology is the main arena for us, at least in competition with China, has had some impact as well. And certainly at CIA, as you were suggesting before, Rula, we've reorganized ourselves to reflect that priority. We have the only single country mission center, which is one of the 12 or so building blocks of our agency. The only single country mission center is devoted to China. We have in the last 3 years tripled the size of our budget devoted to the China challenge. It represents about 20% of our overall budget now. And so, I learned a long time ago, you don't have priorities unless budgets follow them. So, we're devoting a lot of focus, and I can safely predict.
I think this thing about China really kind of brings, at least to me, it makes me think about, I guess, the reason why, like I was saying before, why would, if it is the case that the United States genuinely has an interest in allowing World War III to start right now, because that's what it would mean if there's not a ceasefire within maybe the next year. If Israel, just continues doing what it's doing, escalating with Lebanon, escalating with Iran, if Iran decides to retaliate, World War III is what's going to happen. And if the American empire, or the, whatever it is we want to call it, if the Western imperial structure is allowing that to happen, why? Why is it? Because seemingly that's not in their interest. For me, the thing I've come to is the answer is, as far as I'm concerned, I think they would lose World War III today. I think America would lose World War III if it started right now. But I think their calculation is that America's position in the world, particularly militarily, is collapsing. It's falling off a cliff. Their ability to be the financial center of the world in 5 or 10 years might literally be gone. And then their ability to be a world-spanning empire will fall apart completely. Like, it will all... The American empire, is in panic mode. And they don't think they'll be able to fight World War III in 10 or 15 years. Or, I guess, 20 or 30. They would feel very iffy about it in 10 or 15 years. They certainly would rather it sooner than later. Because China is obviously getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I guess what I was just realizing just now is that, like I was saying before, China isn't in the position like America is in with regard to intelligence, for instance. China isn't dictating terms to Russia and North Korea and Vietnam and stuff like that. They're not dictating terms in the way that America does, because they don't have the same level of power over those countries. They do have some power, and so to a certain extent they can and do dictate terms. But there's far more of a mutualistic relationship in those countries, partly also because maintaining that sense of a mutualistic relationship is part of why, is what holds that coalition together, because it's anti the American system of, we tell you what to do, and if you disagree with us, we'll literally overthrow you. Right? China's trying to paint a different picture. And so at this point, China isn't, in the position that the United States is in. And what I was realizing is that in the future, not only would they be worried about China being more powerful and the United States being more weak, and so the just coalitions, the balance goes the other way. But if that coalition becomes more centralized, more tied together, more integrated, and particularly more, centralized under China, I think is the thing that the United States really is worried about and are really trying to keep from being the situation that they're fighting in World War III, because they know they're setting themselves up for a war. Like, that is very clear by the way they continue to talk about how they spend more and more on China every year and stuff like that. Obviously, they're gearing up for another world war. And they're just letting this one start in Ukraine, and they're letting Ukraine directly attack Russia, which is maybe 2 steps from, the United States being in a war against Russia directly. And then, of course, they're letting Israel try to start a direct war against Lebanon and Iran, which, of course, the United States would have to enter. And then you've got a world war. So the history books will say it started in 2021. Probably. We'll see.
We'll continue to do that over the next decade and beyond.
And do you both see any impact on Xi from the economic problems that China has gone through and over the past year, economic headwinds?
Well, I guess for any ruler of any country, how your economy is performing is an important issue you need to focus on and worry about. I mean, from our perspective,
in terms of his power inside the system,
I think my sense, Bill will have a view, my sense is that Xi Jinping is probably the most powerful Chinese ruler since Mao. He has a very tight control over his political system.
And stable.
And he has an ambitious agenda, both at home and also overseas. And that's why we devote so much effort to understanding China, because it is such a hugely important actor on the international stage. It's one that in many cases contests our interests, contests often our values, and therefore it's really important that we provide our political leaders with the best possible insights into what is often a rather opaque, difficult to read country. And
we're very, very interested in your insights.
Yeah,
so say something.
Always interested in our insights. It's very important, but it's also important to engage with them. I mean, both Bill and I talk to our Chinese counterparts. It's essential that you get across some of the messaging, and we were talking about Ukraine earlier on.
Yeah.
We both sat in front of them and talked them through where we think we would like to see greater Chinese engagement with preventing the passage of dual-use goods, for example.
Yeah. No, and I think, and I've been to
China twice over the course of the past year, because keeping those intelligence channels open is really important, even in the most adversarial or competitive of relationships, to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings and inadvertent collisions. And so for the United States, managing responsibly that big, hugely significant competitive relationship is our biggest challenge, and keeping those intelligence channels open, I think, is an important part of dealing with it. The same is true of what people call intelligence diplomacy, what we both do with allies and partner intelligence services across the Indo-Pacific, too. That is a huge asset for us in dealing with that challenge of the People's Republic of China. So we invest a lot of time
an effort in that.
One area of great competition, of course, is AI. Richard, as I understand it, you're using AI to game out operations and how adversaries may respond, and to also predict human behavior in certain situations. My question is, what AI? Are you developing your own models? Are you using ChatGPT?
I think you'd worry if we were just using ChatGPT 4. Not least because everyone in the world would then be able to see it. No, AI is totally transformative. It already is in our society. It will become societies. It will become even more so over time. That very well, overused word, exponential. You really have to think through the maths of that. It is a graph like that, and if we weren't on top of that, we would very quickly lose relevance. So we are all really committed to being on top of emerging technologies. AI enables us to do some really interesting things around exploitation of data. It also, one example on counterterrorism, you try and find a way of identifying targets who you could approach or disrupt who might be involved in a terrorist group. out on the internet, there is a kind of ocean of extremist bilge, and large language models are brilliant at wading through that lot and distilling it and giving you, if you like, the sort of vernacular that case officers, operational officers can then use as they frame and approach some of these characters. So that's just one example. I know time is short, but I mean, it's a hugely important area, and increasingly we're doing it in partnership. I mean, one of the differences, I guess, in the modern era is that compared with the 1950s, where a lot of key emerging technologies came out of defense and government, now they're coming out of the private sector. And so partnering with those people, enabling, in my case, I mentioned NSIF earlier on, also our National Security Engineering Centre, HMGCC. We're now putting some of these problems out into the public. We're putting our problem book out there and saying, look, these are the issues we're struggling with. Come and help us. And we're getting a fantastic response.
I think that if we get to HEI, Bill, there should be a kill switch in case the AI goes rogue.
If we get to where, I'm sorry?
To HEI, to artificial general intelligence, which a lot of people are working on today. Do you think there should be a kill switch?
Yeah, that'll work.
In case it goes rogue.
Yeah.
All you need is a button.
Huge challenges, as you look at the exponential pace of, development in AI. I think for us, we've been working at this quarter century ago. We set up In-Q-Tel, which is aimed at building stronger partnerships in the private sector. We've vastly expanded that over the last 3.5 years as well, because it's the only way we're going to be able to not just keep pace, but get ahead of competitors like China as well. And we can see it in the work of our operations officers on counterterrorism issues, as Richard said, our ability to navigate smart cities and the use of biometric data against our officers in ways which still allow us to be a very successful human intelligence service. The same is true for our analysts, to be able to digest massive amounts of open source material as well as clandestinely acquired information and put, AI is not going to replace our best human analysts, but it's going to enable them to focus their attention on what matters most to the president and policymakers, which is the answer to the so what question. So why should I care about this, and what are my options for dealing with it as well?
So we have actually run out of time, but I'm just going to end on a lighter note. What's your favorite spy gadget, Richard?
Thank you. I can't name a current one by definition, otherwise I'm in trouble.
Try.
But I tell you what, I'll reach into history. There was Alan Turing worked for that organization I mentioned, HMGCC.
Okay, I don't care about this little Glazer question. I guess I'll just... Yeah, I don't really, I guess, have anything to wrap up with. I guess I said most of what I'm thinking. It's just... I think it's good to be able to watch. It's honestly incredible, actually, to live in an age where you can just be a doofus scrolling on the internet and be like, oh, should I watch, a press conference, an hour-long, question and answer session between a reporter and two of the most powerful people on the planet, two intelligence agency chiefs. It's really incredible, actually, to have that ability. And, I think when I was a kid, when we were kids, I feel like when people talked about democracy, it was always like, oh, we live in a representative democracy because direct democracy is basically impossible. That was kind of the vibe that they taught us growing up, it seemed like. And I think in a lot of ways there's something to that generally, but I think that given the things that the internet unlocks, which is primarily the ability to distribute information genuinely freely. Literally the entire population can have access to the same information. I think maybe that is, the door that unlocks democracy, genuine, total democracy, is being able to genuinely share information like this, to genuinely be able to see what's going on. Obviously we don't have much democracy when these two doofuses have secret, budgets and secret activities all over the globe, killing and, upsetting any government they want. Obviously we don't have that much democracy, but just the ability to watch this gives us more democracy, you know? And so it gives me a lot of hope for the future to know that actually real democracy is possible. We just have to use the tools we have. So that's what I got for you today. Love you guys. And cut.